All right, got something different for you. Today, I am going to be showing you the OPZ, or the OPZ as we say in Canada, from Teenage Engineering. This is my first video on this device. I've only spent a few weeks with it, and it's going to be kind of a, what the heck is this device all about? Why is everybody so in love with it? And should I be in love with it also? Teenage Engineering did send me this device for free, but they have no control over what I say in the video. But I gotta say, I really love this thing, and I'm starting to understand why people dig it so much. First off, it is extremely portable. You can chuck it in your pocket. It's the size of a remote control, as everybody says. You don't even need the app to use it, but the app does give you great visual feedback as to what's happening with all these LEDs and buttons, and that's the thing you need to understand right off the bat. When you get this device, you're not just going to sit down and start making music. You're going to have to figure out a whole bunch of crazy button combinations that control different parameters. If I hold the shift button down right here, different stuff happens. If I press it quickly, different stuff happens. Hold the shift button and one of these lower buttons, we get into something called step components. And what the heck are step components, right? So it's a very complex device, and it's very limited in terms of what you can store on this device and in terms of tracks. So just simple things like how many tracks you have. Well, you only have 8 tracks. So you've got 4 of these drum tracks and 4 of these synthesizer tracks. We do have 8 other tracks that we can do other things with, which it's kind of confusing at first. Like we've got 2 effects tracks, we've got something called a tape track, which allows you to slow down or speed up portions of music. We've got a master track, and the master track is really exciting because it allows you to program in chord changes or chord progressions into a pattern. And we'll see why that is important in a second. Then we've got a performance track, which is a track that allows you to do things kind of on the fly, but actually record those things as well. So there's a lot of stuff you can do to manipulate the sound as it's going. We've got an I/O track, or an input-output track. And with this one, you can actually monitor sound coming in. So I watched this great video by Rachel Collier, and she was using this track just to sing right into the device. It's got a tiny little microphone on it. And so she was recording the output of her performance, singing into this tiny little microphone on the beach or something like that. And it was putting effects on her voice, and then she was recording the output of that. And then there's also only 16 steps in the sequencer. And so if I want to program in a little synth line, then I have 16 steps. I can take it up to 32 or 64, but once I go beyond 16 steps, I can't edit individual notes. And when you first get it and you open the box and you start reading the manual, you're like, what? I can't edit the MIDI information? Like, what about the app? Can I edit the information on the app? And the answer is no, you can't. So how do you overcome this, and why would you like to work with something like this? Well, for starters, having some of these limitations causes you to do things that you would never do in a traditional setup, say with your computer in the studio. And so I do like being pushed into different directions because I find myself falling into patterns everywhere I go, in no matter what program I'm using, right? So you have something like this, and it's going to cause you to do different things, and I love that. I love the fact that when I'm working on this, I'm now starting to get into tactile realm, muscle memory stuff that is part of what I love so much about things like Machine or Push for Ableton. And this thing is all about that kind of muscle memory and repetition. So of course, when I got this, I took it camping with me. Let me just show you a fun little project here. Okay, so on that track, you could hear I've got a bass track, I've got some drums tracks, I've got some synth kind of pad thing, and then I've got some arpeggiated thing that comes in. And then as I was pressing this button right here, I was going through different patterns. And so it's very easy to copy the pattern that you're on and paste it somewhere new. And in each pattern, I sort of changed things up as I went along. And then in one of the later patterns, what I did is I used this thing called the master track. And with the master track, you can program in chord changes. So I took this sequence that I had, which was just kind of this D minor thing, and then programmed in some chord changes using the same patterns. So the coolest thing about this master track is that you can take a very simple pattern, say one that's only 16 steps long, and you can start controlling the chords by playing other chords on your keyboard. So basically what you're doing is you're able to use patterns, these short patterns, and then what you can do is use a chord track to make them do different things. So make them go into different progressions. And that's where things start to get a lot more interesting. So what I'm finding with this device is it's not a regular linear kind of recording thing that you would do on any other program, whether it's something like Machine or even just in something like Cubase. With this, you're coming up with these sometimes simple patterns, and then you're changing those patterns with other ways to manipulate information like this master track. And then you also have something in here called step components. To show that, what I should do is just go over to a blank project. So on this one, we can see I've got tempo. I'm going to press the metronome and just start tapping something in. 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. So if I want to put some hi-hats in, I go to my hi-hat track or percussion track. And I'm just going to sequence this in. The last thing I pressed is going to be the thing that I'm sequencing in right here. So there we go. We got 16 steps. And you think, okay, well, how do I add some complexity with that? I would make it 32 steps long. You could make this whole thing 32 steps long, but then you don't get access to every individual hit. And what you can do to make 16 much more complex is we can add these things called step components. And a step component is where you add some kind of hit, so maybe an extra hit at the end. And then what I can do is I could say, I want this to trigger every second time or every fourth time, something like that. So it's going to loop over 4 times now through this bar, and every fourth time it's going to do that one hit. If I hold the shift, I hit this step right here, so it's selected, and then I hit the step component that says only trigger every second bar. So again, you can change that every fourth bar, whatever you want. But in this case, I want it every other bar, every second bar. So now the first time through, it doesn't trigger. Second time it does. And then we can do the same thing with melodic things or with notes. So we could have, say, a bass line. So I could record that in. Let's just do that. And I'm going to quantize this, by the way, so I can quantize. I love these rotary encoders. They just feel great. And then let's add a little bit of swing to this too. There we go. Now it's swinging just a little bit. And we can hear that hi-hat triggering every once in a while. And then we've got this bass line here. That's just kind of a repetitive thing. The first thing I want to do is get rid of these 2 hits at the end of this and have them happen only every other time. So I select those 2 steps with the shift button pressed down. I hit my specific step component that says every second time. So now so you could add sort of interesting flourishes and they only happen every 4 bars or something like that. I can also go in and go to, say, my hi-hat track and maybe add some more interesting little fills in there. So what I could do on this step right here is I could say, I want this one to trigger twice as many notes on that one step. And then maybe do this one too. Tick-a-da-da-da. And then maybe I want that step component on this note right here to only happen every other bar as well. So now we've got multiple step components. And this is where things get really complex, is that you can take individual hits in your sequencer and have them do different things throughout the repetitions. So let's put in some chords, maybe some arpeggiated stuff. So we're just going to do a very simple little pattern here. And I'm going to set this pattern to be 2 bars long. So I press record, and then I start playing, and it will record for me. Okay, so now we've got a very simple little pattern in A minor. So watch what happens when I go to this master track and I start playing different chords. So I'm going to press play. So you get the idea of how I am now able to take a 16-step sequence and make it much more interesting by using these different ways of controlling the information, like the master track or these step components. Scratching the surface there, but just giving you an idea of how to use this device and how people are creating such complex compositions on this thing with such a, comparatively limited amount of storage space and also comparatively limited amount of sequencing abilities, right? It's very, very cool. So for this, all I wanted to do is show you very quickly how this device can sample, but you have major limitations. Again, you only have 12 seconds of sample time. So let me just show you something that I sampled here just a little bit earlier. All I did is I held this up underneath my Rhodes and played a bunch of chords on the Rhodes. What happens is you have these green and blue LEDs, and they show you the beginning and end of your entire 12-second sample, or however long it was, under 12 seconds. So if I take this end time and move it all the way to the end, we can see that I recorded, and then move the beginning to the top. We can see that I recorded 4 different chords, and this kind of gives you a graphic representation, and you wouldn't need it if you didn't want to. You could just do this by ear. So I'm going to move this one something like that, and then I'm going to go to the end time, and normally you wouldn't have to do this, but cycle through. Okay, so there's my end time right there. Went through on the second chord, so you can imagine that this was kind of what it looked like. So this was the second chord, and it will automatically do some of this for you, and then you can just go refine each chord. Do the same thing here. Very easy to sample stuff on this device, very easy to manipulate samples, a lot of fun to manipulate samples, and definitely something I'm just kind of scratching the surface of myself. So I plan to really dig into this device, but I wanted to show you some of the limitations that you might find when you get this, just so you're prepared for what it actually is, but also to see how they've made this thing possible to overcome those limitations. Go check out all the incredible YouTube videos that have already been made for this device. Make sure you look at videos like Liam Killen, True Cuckoo, Red Means Recording, and once you watch what they're doing with this thing, it's like, man, I really want to learn this device more, and I'm excited to see where it goes. So anyways, more videos of this coming up in the future. I'll play a little tune for you here at the end, and then I will see you in the next video.